The wind sliced through the night like a sharpened blade as she felt his fingers brush her wrist. There, among the cold castle stones, where no gaze should ever find them, the world paused. She trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of all that couldn't be said. The moon watched in silence as he drew near, and she knew that moment would forever change both their destinies. Before we delve into this tale, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. Dawn broke like a shattered promise over the towers of Castle Stonehaven. Mist crept through the courtyards like ghosts seeking rest, and Elara felt every drop of dampness cling to her skin as she swept the stone corridors. Her bare feet knew every crack in the floor, every step worn smooth by the years. It was a silent dance she'd performed since she was 10, when she arrived there as a war orphan, brought by merchants who found her wandering the roads. No one knew exactly where she came from. Her skin had the golden hue of someone born in the Southern Territories, but her eyes held the stormy grey of the North. It was a mystery that bothered the court ladies, who whispered about mixed blood and dubious lineages whenever she passed. Elara heard it all in silence, pretending the words didn't cut like glass. The locket around her neck was her only inheritance, a silver disc split in half, with symbols no one could decipher. Sometimes when the light hit at a certain angle, the marks seemed to move, telling stories her memory had buried. She never took it off, even when the other maids scoffed, saying it was just a worthless piece of metal. That morning, as she polished the chapel's stained glass, Elara heard the sound of hooves clattering on the main courtyard's stone. These weren't the measured steps of the local guard's horses. It was something different, a rhythm that made the air vibrate, awakening something primal in her chest. She approached the window, hiding behind the heavy curtains. A group of riders entered the castle. Their armour gleamed like black mirrors under the weak sun, and their cloaks fluttered like raven wings. At the head of the group, mounted on a black stallion that seemed born of shadows, was a man who made the world around him seem too small to contain him. Elara felt the air escape her lungs. Even from a distance, his presence was overwhelming. Tall, broad-shouldered, he moved with the assurance of someone born to command. When he dismounted, she could see his face better, angular like carved stone with dark eyes that seemed capable of reading secrets in anyone's soul. It was Lord Gareth Blackwood, the Shadow Wolf of the North. She'd heard stories about him in the whispers of the kitchens, a ruthless warrior who had united the northern clans under his leadership, a man who knew no defeat. They said his eyes could freeze an enemy's blood with just a glance, that his presence alone was enough to make kings bow. But why was he here, in Stonehaven? The answer came with the ringing of bells. Lady Eleanor, daughter of the Lord of Stonehaven, was to be married. The union had been arranged months ago, a political alliance that would unite two of the realm's most powerful houses. Elara had helped with the preparations, sewing gowns and arranging flowers, always as invisible as a shadow. Throughout the day, the castle bustled with activity. Nobles from all regions arrived for the ceremony, bringing gifts and expectations. Elara moved among them like a phantom, serving wine and clearing plates, but her eyes always found their way back to Gareth Blackwood. He remained near the windows, observing the activity with an attention that suggested he was evaluating every detail. When he spoke, his voice was deep like distant thunder, and the other men leaned in to listen. There was something magnetic about him, a force that drew glances even when he tried to be discreet. During dinner, Elara was serving, wine when it happened. Her hands trembled, perhaps from exhaustion, perhaps from the tension hanging in the air, and a few drops spilled onto the oak table. It was a small flaw, almost imperceptible, but Lady Isolde, Eleanor's cousin, noticed. "How clumsy," she said, her voice sharp as steel. "Do the maids of this house not know how to serve properly?" The silence that followed, was heavy as lead. All eyes turned to Ilara, who felt her face burn with shame. She murmured an apology, but Lady Isolde wasn't finished. Look at her. She doesn't even seem to know her place. With that questionable appearance, she should be more careful not to cause embarrassment to her betters. The words cut deep. Ilara lowered her head, feeling tears threaten to spill. It was always like this. Her different appearance, her mysterious origin, everything was used as a weapon against her. She was about to retreat when a deep voice cut through the air. Interesting. Gareth Blackwood had spoken. His voice carried a dangerous tone that made everyone at the table turn to him. His dark eyes were fixed on Ilara, but when he continued, it was to Lady Isolde that he directed his words. It's interesting how some people need to diminish others to feel important. The silence was now absolute. Lady Isolde paled, clearly not expecting to be reprimanded by the formidable Shadow Wolf. Gareth rose slowly, and his height commanded immediate respect from everyone in the room. True nobility, he continued, walking to stand beside the table, is revealed not in the cradle one is born into, but in the dignity with which one treats those with less power. Ilara looked up and met his gaze. For a moment that seemed eternal, the world narrowed to that look. She saw something there. She couldn't name, an intensity that made her heart pound and her breath catch. He was seeing her, really seeing her, not as an invisible maid, but as something more. The moment broke when Lady Isolde forced a nervous laugh. Naturally, Lord Blackwood, I merely meant that— I understood perfectly what you meant, he interrupted, returning to his seat, but his eyes remained on Ilara for a few more seconds before drifting away. Ilara finished her service in a daze. Her legs trembled as she returned to the maids' quarters, and she had to lean against the stone wall to catch her breath. What had happened? Why had Gareth Blackwood spoken in her defence? And why did that look make her feel as if she were ablaze inside? Late that night, when the castle finally fell asleep, Ilara found herself unable to rest. She slipped out of her small room and walked the silent corridors, seeking the fresh air of the courtyard. The moon was full, bathing everything in liquid silver. It was then she saw him. Gareth was in the garden, alone, observing the stars. Without his armour and the court's formalities, he seemed more human, but no less imposing. Ilara should have turned back, should have respected the distance that separated their stations. Instead, she found herself walking toward him. He sensed her approach even before he saw her. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. His voice in the quiet of the night made something clench in Ilara's chest. She stopped a few feet away, suddenly conscious of how out of place she must look there. "Sometimes the night is more honest than the day," she replied, surprised by her own courage. Gareth then turned, and in the moonlight his eyes seemed even deeper. He studied her in silence, for a moment that stretched into an eternity. "You are not what you seem to be," he finally said. It wasn't a question, but an affirmation that made Ilara's heart leap. She instinctively touched the locket at her neck. "No one is," she murmured. A slight smile curved his lips, but there was something dark in it. True, but some carry more dangerous secrets than others. They stood there, separated by a few feet, but united by something inexplicable that pulsed in the air between them. Ilara knew she should move away. She knew that moment was forbidden, impossible. But she couldn't move. It was Gareth who broke the spell first, taking a step back. "You should return. The night can be dangerous for those who walk alone." There was something in the way he said it that sounded like both a warning and a promise. Ilara nodded and walked away, but she could feel his gaze burning into her back until she disappeared into the castle's darkness. Back in her room, she touched the locket again, and for a moment she had the strange sensation that it was warmer than it should be. The wedding day of Lady Eleanor dawned grey as molten lead. Ilara woke with a heavy heart, still carrying the memory of those dark eyes that seemed to have carved permanent marks on her soul. Something had changed in her since the encounter in the garden, a restlessness that made her constantly touch the locket, as if it could reveal the secrets Gareth Blackwood had mentioned. The other maids were already bustling since before sunrise, scurrying through the corridors like frantic bees. The wedding was to be the most important event in years, and every detail had to be perfect. Ilara joined the flurry, but her mind remained distant, lost in memories of a deep voice whispering in the darkness. "Ilara!" Agnes's harsh voice, the head housekeeper, pulled her from her reverie. "Lady Eleanor is calling you. Quick!" She hurried up the stone stairs that led to the bride's chambers. The room was filled with silk and lace, a sea of white and gold that made her eyes ache. Lady Eleanor was at the centre of it all like a porcelain doll, while 3 women adjusted her gown. "Oh, finally," Eleanor said when Ilara appeared at the door. "I need you to deliver this to my groom." She extended a letter sealed with red wax. Ilara took it, noting how the paper trembled between her fingers, not because of the letter itself, but because of what it meant. She would have to seek out Gareth Blackwood again. The prospect made her feel a knot of iron butterflies fluttering in her chest. "He should be in the stables," Eleanor continued, checking herself in the mirror. "And Ilara? Be discreet. I don't want anyone to think there's anything improper in the communication between fiancés." Ilara nodded and left, holding the letter as if it were a sacred and cursed object, at the same time. The corridors seemed longer than usual, each step echoing against the stones like the beats of a funeral drum. When she finally reached the stables, the smell of hay and leather enveloped her like a familiar embrace. He was there, as Eleanor had predicted, but not alone. Gareth was conversing in a low voice with 2 men Ilara didn't recognize. Their clothes indicated they came from afar, perhaps from the lands of the far north, where winter never fully ended. There was something tense in the conversation, quick gestures and cautious glances that suggested matters not meant for unfamiliar ears. Ilara hesitated at the entrance, unsure if she should interrupt. It was then that Gareth saw her. His gaze crossed the space between them like an arrow, and she felt the same impact, as always. That sensation that he saw through her, to places even she didn't know. "Gentlemen, we can continue this later," he said to his companions, without taking his eyes off Ilara. The men moved away after an exchange of meaningful glances. Ilara was left alone with Gareth in the hay-scented space, feeling small and exposed under his piercing gaze. "A message from the bride?" he asked, noticing the letter in her hands. Ilara nodded and approached, extending the paper. When he took it, their fingers touched for an instant. It was a light, almost casual contact, but she felt as if an electrical spark had coursed through her entire body. Gareth broke the seal and read quickly. His eyebrows furrowed slightly, but he refolded the letter and put it away without comment. "Is she nervous?" he asked after a moment. "All brides are nervous," Ilara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He took a few steps, approaching one of the horses, but Ilara could feel his attention remained on her. "And you?" he said suddenly. "Have you ever dreamed of marrying?" The question caught her off guard. Ilara felt her cheeks flush and lowered her eyes. "Dreams are luxuries for those who can choose their destiny," she murmured. When she looked up, she found Gareth observing her with an intensity that made her heart race. There was something different in his eyes, a darkness that hadn't been there the day before. "Destiny," he repeated, as if the word tasted bitter. "A chain some consider unbreakable." Ilara felt there were layers of meaning in those, words that she couldn't fully comprehend. Before she could respond, they heard approaching footsteps. She instinctively moved away, creating a respectful distance between them. "My lord," said one of Stonehaven's guards, appearing at the entrance. "Lord Alden requests your presence in the Great Hall." Gareth nodded, but before moving away, he looked at Ilara one last time. "Be careful with dreams," he said, his voice too low for the guard to hear. "Sometimes they have the power to change more than we imagine." And then he was gone, leaving Ilara alone with the echo of his words and a heart that pounded as if she had run for miles. The rest of the morning passed in frantic preparations. Ilara helped decorate the chapel, arranged the banquet tables, and checked every detail Agnes considered important. But part of her mind remained in the stables, reliving every word, every glance, every second of that impossible encounter. When the bells announced the start of the ceremony, Ilara positioned herself at the back of the chapel, along with the other maids. The church was filled with nobles in their finest clothes, a symphony of colours and silks that contrasted with the simple grey stone of the walls. Lady Eleanor entered radiant in her wedding gown, walking slowly to the altar where Gareth awaited her. He was magnificent in his formal attire, black as his reputation, with golden details that accentuated his imposing posture. Ilara couldn't tear her eyes away from him. The priest began the ceremony with the traditional words about union and eternal commitment. Ilara heard everything as if she were underwater, the words arriving distorted and strange. Her gaze remained fixed on the altar, where two people prepared to seal a destiny neither of them had truly chosen. It was then that it happened. The moment the priest asked if anyone had objections to the marriage, Gareth looked at her. Through all that crowd of noble faces and social expectations, his eyes met hers with a precision that made the world stop. Ilara felt as if she couldn't breathe. There was something in that look, a silent question, a quiet plea, a pain she recognized because she carried it too. For an infinite moment, it was as if they were alone in that chapel, connected by something that transcended logic and convenience. The moment broke when Lady Isolde, seated a few rows ahead, turned, slightly, and noticed the exchange of glances. Her lips curved into a malicious smile that promised nothing good. The ceremony continued without interruption. Gareth said, "I do," with a firm voice that echoed through the ancient stones. Eleanor did the same, her voice clear as crystal. They kissed chastely amidst the applause of the congregation, and Ilara felt something die inside her. During the banquet that followed, she kept busy serving and cleaning, trying not to look at the main table where the newlyweds received congratulations. But occasionally, treacherously, her gaze drifted in his direction, and always found him watching, her too. It was Lady Isolde who planted the first seed of poison. "It's strange," she commented aloud to her table companions, "how some people don't know their place. I wonder what kind of upbringing certain maids receive that makes them think they can aspire beyond their station." The words were spoken casually, but Ilara knew they were directed at her. Other conversations quieted as the insinuations spread like wildfire among the attendees. She continued serving, pretending not to hear, but she could feel the curious glances multiplying around her. It must be difficult for a young woman without family to know appropriate boundaries, Isolde continued, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Especially when one has such a, shall we say, striking appearance. Some might misinterpret certain attentions. Ilara stopped in the middle of the hall, a wine pitcher trembling in her hands. The implications were too clear to ignore. Isolde was suggesting there was something improper between her and one of the guests. Probably Gareth. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Ilara felt hundreds of eyes on her, judging, speculating, condemning. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, but she raised her chin with a dignity that surprised everyone, including herself. "The education I received," she said, her voice clear despite her internal tremor, "taught me that true baseness is not in one's origin, but in the gratuitous cruelty some people show when they feel threatened." The silence was now absolute. No one expected a maid to respond that way, much less with such eloquence. Lady Isolde paled, clearly unprepared for a direct answer. It was then that Gareth stood up. Slowly, deliberately, he approached where Elara stood. Each of his steps echoed through the hall like a sentence being pronounced. When he stopped before her, Elara could see the storm in his eyes. "Lady Isolde is right about one thing," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made everyone lean in to listen. "Some people truly don't know their place." Elara closed her eyes, bracing herself for the final blow. But when Gareth continued, his words utterly surprised her. "A person's place is not determined by the cradle they're born into, but by the character they demonstrate. And in this room, I can clearly see who possesses true nobility and who merely wears its clothes." His gaze swept over Isolde's entire table before returning to Elara. There was something there she couldn't name: protection, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart nearly stop. "Now," Gareth continued, extending his hand to Elara, "I believe this lady deserves the respect due to any person of honour." Elara looked at the outstretched hand, aware that accepting it would be crossing a line from which there would be no return. The entire hall watched, a collective breath held, awaiting her decision. She placed her hand in his. The touch enveloped her fingers like liquid fire, and as Gareth led her out of the hall under the astonished gaze of all present, Elara knew her world had changed forever. Gareth led her through the stone corridors in silence, but Elara could feel the tension radiating from him, like heat from a forge. Their footsteps echoed against the ancient walls, creating a rhythm that seemed to tick off the seconds until an inevitable explosion. She didn't dare speak, didn't dare breathe too loudly, conscious that she had crossed a line that would change everything. They stopped in a hidden alcove behind a heavy tapestry. There, away from curious eyes and venomous tongues, Gareth finally turned to her. His face was tense, jaw clenched, and Elara saw for the first time a crack in the mask of control he always wore. "Do you know what just happened?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Elara swallowed hard but didn't lower her eyes. "I know I've probably just lost my place here," she replied, "but I couldn't let them—" "They'll destroy you," Gareth interrupted, taking a step closer. "Don't you understand? To people like Lady Isolde, you've just become a threat that needs to be eliminated." His proximity made Elara feel dizzy. She could detect the scent of leather and spices he carried, could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of battles and difficult decisions. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "Why did you defend me?" Gareth was silent for a long moment, and Elara saw something warring in his eyes, as if he were fighting an internal battle between duty and desire. "Because," he finally said, "some things are worth more than political prudence." Before Elara could respond, they heard approaching footsteps. Gareth gently pushed her further into the alcove, positioning himself between her and anyone who might appear. The protective gesture made something clench in her chest. It was Lady Eleanor, still in her wedding gown, but with an expression that didn't match the joy she should be showing at a wedding celebration. "Gareth!" she called, her voice echoing through the empty corridors. He moved slightly away from Elara and stepped out of the alcove, leaving her hidden behind the tapestry. Elara could hear them speaking but couldn't distinguish the words. Eleanor's tone was urgent, almost desperate, and his replies were short and controlled. After a few eternal minutes, Eleanor walked away. Gareth returned to the alcove, but something had changed in his face. He was more closed off, more distant, as if he had erected walls around his emotions. "You need to leave the castle," he said without preamble. Elara felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "What?" "Tonight. Pack your things and go. I'll arrange an escort to the nearest town and enough money for you to start a new life." The coldness in his voice cut Elara like a razor. Where was the man who had held her hand before everyone, who had spoken of character, and true nobility. "Is that how you solve problems?" she asked, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "Discarding people when they become inconvenient?" His eyes flashed dangerously. "I'm trying to protect you. People like Lady Isolde have influence. They can make your life here a living hell." And what did Eleanor say? Ilara didn't know where she'd found the courage to ask that question. Gareth stiffened visibly. "That's none of your concern." "Of course not," Ilara laughed, but there was no humour in the sound. "None of this is my concern, is it? I'm just an inconvenient maid who forgot her place." "That's not it." "Then what is it?" she interrupted him, taking a step forward. "Because a few minutes ago you were defending me before all the nobility, and now you're sending me away as if I were a threat to your reputation." Gareth ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that revealed his internal agitation. "You don't understand the situation you've gotten yourself into. The marriage to Eleanor, it's not just a union. It's a political alliance that could determine the future of two regions. If anyone suspects there's something—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Ilara understood perfectly. "Something between us," she completed, her voice low. "There's nothing between us," he said, but the words sounded too forced to be true. Ilara felt tears threaten to spill, but she held them back with iron determination. "You're right," she said, raising her chin. "There's nothing, and there won't be anything. You don't need to worry about your precious political alliance." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Ilara." There was something broken in the way he said her name. She turned slowly and saw that the mask had fallen completely. His eyes were heavy with a pain she recognized because she felt it, too. "If I could choose," he said, his voice hoarse. "If the world were different. If I were different." "But it isn't," she completed when he couldn't continue. "And you aren't." They stood there, separated by a few feet, but united by something both knew to be impossible. The silence stretched between them like a rope about to snap. It was Ilara who broke first. "I'm leaving," she said, "but not because you're telling me to, because I've finally understood my place in this story." She walked out of the alcove without looking back, but she could feel the weight of his gaze following her until she disappeared into the darkness of the corridors. Back in the maids' quarters, Ilara sat on her narrow bed and looked around the small room that had been her home for so many years. Her possessions were few: some simple clothes, the locket she never took off her neck, and a worn book of poems she had found abandoned in the library years ago. She touched the locket, feeling the cold metal against her skin, warmed by emotion. For a moment she had the strange sensation that it was vibrating slightly, as if responding to the whirlwind of feelings in her chest. A soft knock at the door made her look up. Agnes entered without waiting for an answer, her face etched with worry. "Child, what was that commotion in the hall?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Everyone's talking about you and Lord Blackwood." Ilara sighed. "I'm leaving, Agnes. Tonight." The older woman looked at her with surprise. "Because of that viper, Lady Isolde? Child, you can't let people like her make you run." "It's not because of her," Ilara lied. "It's time to move on. I always knew I wouldn't. Stay here forever." Agnes studied her with sharp eyes that had seen many things over the years. "This has to do with him, doesn't it?" she asked softly. "With Lord Blackwood." Ilara didn't answer, but her expression must have revealed the truth. "Oh, child," Agnes sighed, taking her hands in hers. "Some paths are forbidden from the start, no matter how much our heart wishes to walk them." "I know," Ilara whispered. "That's why I have to go." Agnes helped her pack her few belongings into a small bag. When they finished, she handed Ilara a small amount of coins. "For the road," she said, ignoring the young woman's protests. "And be careful. The world out there can be cruel to women travelling alone." They embraced for a long moment, And Ilara felt she was leaving behind more than just a place. She was abandoning the only family she had ever known. The moon was high when Ilara finally left the castle. She used a back exit she knew well, avoiding the guards and anyone who might try to stop her. The night air was cold against her face, and she pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. She had walked only a few hundred yards when she heard the sound of hooves behind her. Her heart leaped. Could it be Gareth coming after her? But when she turned, she saw it was one of the castle guards. "Miss," he said, dismounting, "Lord Blackwood asked me to deliver this to you." He extended a small, heavy pouch with coins and a folded paper. Ilara took both with trembling hands. The guard remounted and rode off without another word, leaving her alone on the road under the moonlight. With trembling fingers, she opened the paper. The handwriting was firm, masculine, but she could sense the haste with which it had been written. "Ilara, the money is enough to start a new life wherever you choose. Go far, be happy, forget everything that happened here, forget me. Forgive me for not being the man I should have been. G." She reread the letter several times before folding it carefully and placing it against her chest. The tears finally came then, silent and warm, streaming down her cheeks like soft rain. Ilara looked one last time at the towers of Castle Stonehaven rising against the starry sky. Somewhere inside, Gareth was living his new life. As Eleanor's husband, fulfilling his duty, following the path destiny had laid out for him. She turned her back on the castle and began to walk down the road, each step taking her further from everything she knew. But even as she pulled away, a part of her knew that some stories don't end just because we decide to abandon them. The locket around her neck seemed to pulse like a living heart, as if it were a promise that destiny had not yet finished writing the end of that story. 3 weeks had passed since Ilara left Castle Stonehaven, and the small Whiteford village had become her temporary refuge. It was a simple place where people lived from working in the quarries and surrounding fields, without much concern for politics or noble intrigues. Here she could just be Ilara, the young woman who had arrived looking for work at the local inn. The innkeeper, a robust woman named Bertha, had offered shelter in exchange for help in the kitchen and serving travellers. It was honest work, and Ilara threw herself into it with determination, trying to forget the stormy eyes that haunted her dreams every night. But the past has a way of catching up to us even in the most remote hiding places. That morning, Ilara was hanging clothes on the line behind the inn when she noticed unusual movement on the main road. A group of riders had stopped in the centre of the village, and even from a distance, she could tell they weren't ordinary merchants. Their armour and horses suggested noble origins. Her heart pounded when she recognised the crests. They were men from Stonehaven. Ilara hid behind a leafy tree, watching as the riders talked to some villagers. They were looking for someone. She could tell by their gestures and how they showed something that looked like a portrait or description. They were looking for her. One of the inmaids, a young girl named Daisy, came running toward her. "Ilara," she whispered, breathless. "Those men are asking about a young woman who looks like you. They say she's a fugitive, that she stole something from the castle." Ilara felt her blood run cold. Fugitive? Thief? The accusations were false, but that didn't matter. If they found her, it would be her word against that of powerful nobles. "What did you tell them?" Ilara asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "Nothing yet, but Bertha's nervous. She doesn't want trouble with the nobility." Ilara nodded, understanding perfectly. Bertha had been kind in taking her in, but she wouldn't risk her business for a stranger. "Tell Bertha I went to gather herbs in the forest," Ilara instructed, "and that I probably won't be back until tomorrow." Daisy nodded and ran back. Ilara grabbed her small bag, checked that the locket was secure under her blouse, and silently headed into the dense forest that surrounded the village. The forest was ancient, with trees so tall they blocked most of the sunlight. Ilara had explored its edges during her weeks in Whiteford village, but had never ventured far. Now, driven by desperation, she followed a narrow trail that snaked among the moss-covered trunks. She walked for hours, stopping only to drink water from crystal-clear streams and eat some wild berries she recognized as safe. When the sun began to set, she found a small clearing where she could rest without being seen from the main trail. It was there, in the stillness of the forest, that something inexplicable happened. Ilara was preparing to sleep when the locket around her neck began to grow warm. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the heat gradually increased until it became impossible to ignore. She took it off to examine it under the faint moonlight that filtered through the canopies. The silver metal was glowing. It wasn't a normal reflection of moonlight, it was a luminescence coming from within the locket itself, making the symbols engraved on its surface pulse as if they were alive. Ilara held it with trembling hands, mesmerized by the phenomenon. Suddenly, images began to appear. They were fragments, like pieces of a broken dream. She saw a castle different from Stonehaven, larger and older, rising on sea-beaten cliffs. She saw a dark-haired woman who looked much like her, wearing a royal blue gown and the same locket around her neck. She saw men in black armor attacking the castle, fire-consuming ancient towers, people running in panic. And she saw a child, herself years younger, being carried by a desperate woman through dark corridors, the locket being placed around her neck with urgent words she couldn't understand. The visions lasted only a few minutes, but left Ilara trembling and confused. When the locket's glow finally faded, she held it against her chest, feeling that a crucial piece of her identity had been revealed. She wasn't just an orphan without a past. She was someone important enough that people wanted to kill her as a child. And now, somehow, they were looking for her again. But who? And why? Ilara spent the night awake, alternating between examining the locket, which had returned to normal, and watching the forest shadows. When dawn arrived, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to flee, she would return to the village, but not to surrender or hide. She would return, to find out exactly what those men wanted and why they were hunting her. It was a risky plan, but Ilara was tired of running from a past she didn't understand. Back in Whiteford village, she discovered that the riders had left during the night, apparently convinced she wasn't in the village. Bertha greeted her with visible relief. "Thank heavens you were out," the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Those men asked a lot of questions. They said you were a thief, that you had stolen something very valuable. And you believed them?" Ilara asked. Bertha studied, her with keen eyes. "I know enough about people to know you're no thief," she finally said. "But I also know there's more to you than meets the eye. Always have." Ilara nodded, grateful for the woman's trust. "I need to discover the truth about my past," she said. "About who I really am." "And you think you'll find those answers by going back where you came from?" "No. I think I'll find them by going where I belong." Bertha frowned. "And where is that?" Ilara touched the locket under her blouse, feeling the cold metal against her skin. "I don't know yet, but I will find out." 2 days later, a passing merchant brought news that made Ilara's heart race. There were rumours that Lord Gareth Blackwood had left Castle Stonehaven, accompanied by only a few trusted men, heading north. Some said it was a diplomatic mission. Others whispered about marital problems. Ilara listened in silence, pretending to have no particular interest in the news. But that night, alone in her small room, she made a decision she knew was dangerous. If Gareth was travelling north and if her locket visions showed a castle by the sea in that direction, then perhaps destiny was conspiring to reunite their stories once more. Ilara spent the next few days preparing for a long journey. She gathered money, bought supplies, and an old but sturdy horse from a local farmer. Bertha tried to dissuade her, but Ilara was determined. On the morning of her departure, Bertha handed her a small pouch of medicinal herbs. "For the road," she said. "And child, be careful. Whoever you are, Whatever they're looking for, don't let them destroy the good person you are. Ilara hugged her, feeling she was leaving behind another family. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. As she left Whiteford Village behind, Ilara didn't know she was being watched. A cloaked figure had followed her every move during the past few days and now trailed at a safe distance, reporting everything via messenger ravens flying toward unknown destinations. The true hunt had begun. And this time, Ilara was walking directly into the heart of the storm that had defined her life since birth. A storm of which she was both victim and central piece in a game she didn't yet fully comprehend. The locket around her neck remained cold and silent, but Ilara could feel she was approaching something important. With every mile she travelled northward, a sense of familiarity grew in her chest, as if she were returning home after a long absence. A home she had never known, but one that had awaited her for years. The castle emerged from the mist like a mirage made of stone and memories. Ilara pulled her horse's reins atop the hill, her heart pounding erratically as she contemplated the sight that had haunted her dreams for weeks. It was exactly as she'd seen in the locket's visions, towering spires rising over rugged cliffs, where the sea crashed in furious waves hundreds of feet below. Castle Ravenwood. The name came to her effortlessly, as if she had always known it. Her home. The certainty hit her like a lightning bolt, nearly knocking her from the saddle. This was the place where she was born, where she had spent the first years of her life before everything collapsed in flames and blood. The locket around her neck pulsed once, as if confirming her thoughts. Ilara took a deep breath and guided her horse down the winding road toward the castle. With each step, more details became familiar. The eastern tower with its stones blackened by some ancient fire, the main gate with its carved lions, the now wild gardens where she had played as a child. It was when she got closer that she saw the horses. They were in the main courtyard, and Ilara immediately recognized the colours and crests. Men from Stonehaven. Her blood ran cold when she realized the implications. Gareth was here. Ilara dismounted at a safe distance and tied her horse to a tree. She needed to know what was happening before revealing herself. Using skills she had developed during years of serving in the castle. She approached silently along the partially destroyed walls. Voices echoed from the great hall, and Ilara hid behind a broken pillar to observe. What she saw made her stagger. Gareth was there, even more imposing than in her memories, but there was something different about him. He seemed tired, as if carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. Beside him, 3 men Ilara didn't recognize, nobles by their attire, but with a shadowy aura that made her instinctively recoil. And then she heard the words that made her world tremble. The locket must be with her. One of the strangers said, his voice sharp as steel. It's the only explanation for her having escaped for so long. Marcus is right, another agreed. The Ravenwood lineage has always been protected by ancient magic. The locket is the key to everything. Ilara instinctively touched her neck, feeling the cold metal beneath the fabric of her blouse. And if she doesn't cooperate? Asked the third man. It was Gareth who responded, and his voice carried a coldness Ilara had never heard before. She will cooperate. She'll have no choice when she discovers the truth about what she truly is. The words struck Ilara like physical blows. Gareth knew who she was. Had he always known? All those weeks at Castle Stonehaven, all those moments laden with tension. Had they been a lie? She was about to retreat when she heard footsteps behind her. Before she could turn, a strong hand grabbed her arm. "Well, well," said a familiar voice. "Look who decided to join the party." It was Sir Kale, one of Gareth's closest knights. His face was split by a cruel smile as he dragged her into the great hall. "My lord," he announced, "I've found our special guest." The silence that followed was deafening. Gareth turned slowly, and when his eyes met hers, Ilara saw something that shocked her deeply. Not surprise, but relief, as if he had been waiting for her. "Ilara," he said, and there was something strange in the way he pronounced her name. "You've finally arrived." The other men approached, forming a circle around her. Ilara raised her chin, refusing to show fear. "Lord Blackwood," she said, forcing formality into her voice. "What a surprise to find you so far from home, and from your wife." Something passed through his eyes, pain perhaps, or regret, but it was too quick for her to be sure. "Circumstances have changed," he replied, "as have many other things." One of the strangers, the one who had been called Marcus, stepped forward. "Enough pleasantries," he said impatiently. "Girl, you have something that belongs to us." Ilara feigned confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The locket," Marcus said, extending his hand. "Hand it over now and perhaps you will be spared." "Spared from what?" Ilara looked directly at Gareth. "What exactly do you accuse me of?" It was Gareth who responded, and his voice carried a weight she didn't understand. "Of being who you are, Ilara of Ravenwood, last heir of a lineage that should have died 15 years ago." The name hit Ilara like thunder. Ravenwood, the surname she had never known, that had been ripped from her along with everything else when she was just a child. "My name is Ilara," she said, her voice trembling despite her determination to remain strong. "I don't know what Ravenwood you're talking about." Marcus laughed, a humorless sound. "Want to keep pretending? Very well. Perhaps this will jog your memory." He gestured, and 2 men approached her. Ilara recoiled, but there was nowhere to go. They held her firmly as Marcus drew closer, clearly intending to take the locket by force. It was then that Gareth moved. "No," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made everyone stop. "No one touches her without my permission." Marcus turned to him, annoyed. "Blackwood, we don't have time for your scruples. The girl has what we need." "And she'll hand it over willingly," Gareth retorted, approaching Ilara. "Won't you?" There was something in his eyes, a message she couldn't decipher. He stopped before her, so close she could feel the warmth of his body. "Ilara," he said softly, "you know why you're here. You know this is where you were born, where you belong. The locket brought you back because it's time to reclaim what's yours." "And what is mine?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gareth extended his hand, and this time there was no command in the gesture, only a silent plea. "Your heritage, your title, your power." Ilara looked at the outstretched hand, then at the men surrounding her. There was danger there, she could feel it, but there were also truths she needed to know. Slowly she removed the locket from her neck and placed it in Gareth's hand. What happened next made everyone recoil in shock. The locket exploded in silver light as soon as it touched his skin. But this time it wasn't just visions that manifested, it was pure power, ancient and mighty, that made the castle stones vibrate and the air crackle with electricity. Gareth staggered, but held the locket firmly in his hand. When the light finally faded, his eyes met Ilara's with an intensity that made her shiver. "My lady," he said, and his voice carried a respect he hadn't shown before. "Lady Ilara of Ravenwood, last descendant of the house that ruled these lands for 1,000 years." The other men immediately knelt. Marcus, who moments before had spoken with authority, now bowed his head in reverence. Ilara looked around, confused and haunted. "I don't understand," she said. "If you knew who I was, why were you hunting me like a fugitive?" Gareth approached, returning the locket to her. When their fingers touched, she felt the same electric spark as always, but now amplified by the power that still pulsed in the air. "Because," he said, "there are forces that want to use your power for their own ends, and others that want to destroy you before you can claim it. And you," Ilara stared directly at him, "what is your position in all of this?" Gareth was silent for a long moment, and Ilara saw the internal battle reflected in his eyes. "I," he finally said. was sent to protect you, even if that means protecting you from myself." Before Ilara could respond, the sound of galloping horses echoed from the courtyard. Marcus rose quickly, his hand instinctively going for his sword. "They've found us," he said. "We need to get out of here. Now." "Who found us?" Ilara asked, but Gareth was already moving. "I'll explain later," he said, taking her hand. "If you want to live to discover the whole truth about who you are, you need to trust me now." Ilara looked into his eyes and saw sincerity there. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but she knew she was at the center of something much larger than herself. "Where to?" she asked. Gareth pointed to a secret passage that opened in the hall wall. An exit Ilara hadn't noticed, but which now seemed familiar, as if she had known it since childhood. "To the only place where we'll be safe," he said. "To the ancestral chambers of Ravenwood, where the power of your lineage can protect you." And as they ran through the dark passage, Ilara could hear the sound of battle echoing behind them, knowing that her life of flight and anonymity had ended forever. Now began something much more dangerous, the fight for her right to exist. The ancestral chambers of Ravenwood stretched deep beneath the castle, like a labyrinth of memories crystallized in stone. Gareth guided Ilara through corridors lit by crystals that glowed with their own light, their footsteps echoing against walls covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with ancient life. Ilara felt the locket burn against her skin with every step they took. It was as if the object was responding to the power emanating from that place, recognizing its ancestral home after decades of exile. "This way," Gareth said, guiding her to a circular chamber in the heart of the depths. "Here you will be safe." The room was impressive. The walls were covered with frescoes that told the history of House Ravenwood. Noble warriors, powerful queens, epic battles against creatures of shadow. In the old center, a fountain of crystal-clear water reflected the light of the crystals like a magic mirror. Ilara slowly approached one of the paintings, and her heart nearly stopped. It was a woman who looked exactly like her, wearing the same locket, standing before the castle in all its ancient splendor. "Your mother," Gareth said behind her, his voice soft. "Lady Seraphina of Ravenwood." Ilara touched the painting with trembling fingers. Was she queen?" "Not queen," Gareth corrected. "Something much more important. She was a guardian, the last of a lineage that protected the balance between the human realms and other forces." Ilara turned to face him, finally ready to hear the whole truth. "Other forces?" Gareth sighed deeply, as if about to reveal a secret he had carried his whole life. "The world isn't just what we see, Ilara. There are ancient powers, creatures that live in the shadows between realms, magics that have been forgotten but never truly died. Your family was chosen 1,000 years ago to keep these forces in check." He approached another painting, this one showing shadowy warriors attacking the castle. 15 years ago, a man named Malachor decided he no longer wanted to live under these protections. He gathered other discontented nobles and attacked Ravenwood, intending to destroy your family and seize the Guardian's power for himself. Ilara felt tears burn her eyes. "And my parents?" "They died protecting you," Gareth said, his voice heavy with regret. "Your mother used her last moments of life to hide you with a trusted servant, along with the locket that contains the essence of your lineage's power." "And you?" Ilara asked, a terrible suspicion growing in her chest. "How do you know all this?" Gareth turned away, unable to maintain eye contact. "Because," he said, his voice broken, "I was there that night. The silence that followed was heavy as lead." Ilara felt the world sway around her. "You were with them," she whispered. "With my family's killers?" Gareth closed his eyes as if the pain were physical. "I was 16, he said. "My father believed Malachor's promises, that the Guardians were tyrants who oppressed the common folk. I was young, foolish, and blindly followed what he said. Ilara moved away from him, her heart shattering. "You helped kill them," she accused, her voice trembling with fury and pain. "No," Gareth said desperately. "When I saw what was really happening, when I saw your mother fighting to protect an innocent child, I understood that I had been manipulated. I tried to stop it, but it was too late." He turned to her, and Ilara saw tears in his eyes. "For the past 15 years, I've lived with the guilt of not having been strong enough to make the right choice that night. That's why I dedicated my life to protecting you, even if you never knew." "Protect me?" Ilara laughed bitterly. "You married me to another woman." "The marriage to Eleanor was arranged by her father as part of a political alliance," Gareth explained, "but also because he suspected I knew where you were. Marrying his daughter was a way to keep me under surveillance." Ilara felt as if she couldn't breathe. "Lord Alden. He's involved in all of this." "Alden is a disciple of Malachor," Gareth said, "as were the men who were with me today. They forced me to help them find you, threatening not only my life, but that of innocent people who could be harmed in the search." Ilara walked to the fountain in the centre of the chamber, needing a moment to process everything she had heard. The water reflected her face, but for a moment she saw another person, her mother, young and strong, looking back at her through the years. "What do they want from me now?" she finally asked. "They want you to use the Guardian's power to open the gates between worlds," Gareth responded, "to free creatures that were imprisoned millennia ago. They believe they can control these forces, but they are wrong. If the portals are opened, there will be nothing that can stop the destruction that will follow." Ilara touched the locket, feeling the power pulse under her fingers. "And if I refuse?" "They will kill you," Gareth said simply. "And they will try to find another way to access the power. It may take decades, but eventually they will succeed. Then I have no choice." "There is always a choice," said a new voice, echoing through the chambers. Both turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was an elderly woman, dressed in dark robes with eyes that gleamed with ancient wisdom. "Elder Rowan," Gareth said, bowing respectfully. "I thought you were dead." The woman smiled. "Dying is easy," she said. "Living, long enough to see justice done, that's what's difficult." She approached Ilara, studying her with keen eyes. "You have your mother's look," she said softly, "and I hope you also have her courage." "Who are you?" Ilara asked. "I was your mother's mentor," Rowan replied. "And now, if you accept, I will be yours. There is much you need to learn about your powers if you wish to face what is to come." "What is to come?" Rowan looked gravely at Gareth, then back at Ilara. "A choice that will define the fate of all realms. You can try to seal the Guardian's powers forever, ensuring they are never misused again. But that would mean giving up everything your lineage represents and living as an ordinary person for the rest of your life. And the other option? Fully accept your heritage and face Malachor in direct combat. Winning, you will restore balance and protect the realms. Losing, well, there will be no world to worry about." Ilara looked at Gareth, seeking guidance in his eyes. "What do you think I should do?" Gareth approached her slowly. "I think," he said, "that you already know the answer. Otherwise you wouldn't have come home." Ilara nodded, feeling a certainty grow in her chest. She had spent her whole life running from who she was. Now it was time to embrace her destiny. "When do we start?" she asked Rowan. The elder smiled. "Now," she said. "But first, there's something you need to understand about the power you carry." Rowan gestured, and the fountain water began to glow. Images formed on the surface, visions of Ilara using powers she never knew she possessed, facing shadowy creatures protecting innocent people. "The locket isn't just a symbol," Rowan explained. "It's an amplifier. The true power has always been within you. The locket merely awakens and focuses it." Ilara felt something awaken in her chest, a warm, powerful energy that pulsed in sync with her heart. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "You won't be alone," Gareth said, taking her hand. "This time I'll make the right choice. This time I'll fight by your side." Ilara looked at him, seeing the determination in his eyes, but also the vulnerability. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pain and the lies, she still felt the connection that bound them from the very first moment they met. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Gareth smiled, and for the first time since they reunited, it was a completely sincere smile. "Because," he said, "I've discovered that some things are worth more than fear or guilt, and you are one of them." Before Ilara could respond, the sound of explosions echoed through the chambers. Stones fell from the ceiling and the glow of the crystals flickered. "They've found the entrance," Rowan said urgently. "Training will have to wait. It's time to discover what you are truly capable of." Ilara touched the locket one last time, then tucked it under her blouse and turned to face the chamber entrance. She could hear voices approaching, voices full of rage and thirst for power. "Then let them come," she said, feeling the power flow through her veins like liquid fire. "It's time to show them why the Ravenwood lineage was chosen to protect the realms." Gareth positioned himself beside her, sword drawn, ready for the final battle. And as the enemies approached, Ilara finally understood something her mother had tried to teach her years ago through the locket. Sometimes the greatest power isn't in running from who we are, but in fully embracing our destiny and fighting for what is right. The first explosion made the ancestral chambers tremble as if the very earth was being torn apart. Ilara felt the power flow through her veins like a surging river, responding to the approaching danger. Beside her, Gareth gripped his sword with a determination that cut the air like a sharp blade. "They're forcing their way in," Elder Rowan said, her eyes glowing with ancient magic. "Malachor brought more men than we expected." The echo of heavy footsteps reverberated through the corridors, accompanied by voices that carried authority and a thirst for vengeance. Ilara could distinguish Marcus's voice among them, shouting orders to find her at all costs. "How many are there?" Ilara asked, surprised by the calm in her own voice. "Many," Gareth responded, "but numbers don't matter when you're fighting for the right cause." He turned to her, and Ilara saw in his eyes something that made her heart accelerate. It wasn't just determination. It was a profound tenderness, as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Ilara," he said, taking her free hand, "before this begins, I need you to know." "I know," she interrupted softly. "I always have." Her words were cut short by the sound of crumbling stones. The chamber's entrance had been breached. Malachor appeared first, an imposing figure dressed in black who seemed to siphon the light around him. He was older than Ilara expected, with greying hair and eyes that glowed with an insatiable hunger. Behind him came at least 10 armed men, including Marcus and, to Ilara's shock, Lord Alden of Stonehaven. "Finally," Malachor said, his voice echoing through the ancient stones. "The last heir of Ravenwood, in the place where it all began." Ilara stepped forward, feeling the ancestral power of her lineage respond to the presence of the man who had destroyed her family. "Malachor," she said, and her voice carried an authority she didn't know she possessed. 15 years running from the consequences of your crimes. It's time to face justice." Malachor laughed, a humorless sound that made the wall crystals vibrate. "Justice?" he repeated. "Naive child. Your parents were guardians of a power that could have elevated our civilization beyond its wildest dreams. Instead, they kept it locked away, wasting it in the name of a balance that only benefited the weak. They protected the world from forces you don't understand," Ilara retorted. "I understand perfectly," Malachor said, extending one hand. Ilara saw that he wore a black ring that pulsed with dark energy. That's why I spent 15 years perfecting my own abilities, preparing for this moment. He gestured, and shadows began to materialize around him, semi-formed creatures that seemed made of solidified nightmares. Give me the locket, Malachor continued, and perhaps I'll allow you to die quickly. Ilara touched the locket through her blouse, feeling it pulse with comforting warmth. I'd rather die fighting, she said. As you wish, Malachor said, and the shadows attacked. What followed was a chaos of light and darkness. Gareth lunged at Malachor's men, his sword cutting the air in lethal arcs. Rowan conjured energy barriers that glowed like auroras, protecting them from the attacks of the shadowy creatures. But it was Ilara who became the center of the battle. The locket exploded in silver light as she held it, and suddenly the power of 1,000 years of guardians flowed through her. She raised her hands, and bolts of pure energy cut through the air, shattering the shadowy creatures as if they were made of smoke. Malachor recoiled, surprised by the intensity of her power. Impossible, he muttered. You're just a girl. I am Ilara of Ravenwood, she declared, her voice echoing with ancestral authority. Daughter of Seraphina, heir of the Guardians, protector of the balance. And you, she pointed at him, are a parasite feeding on darkness. She advanced, and each step made the ground vibrate with power. The paintings on the walls seemed to come alive, as if the ancient guardians were manifesting to support her. Malachor conjured his own magic, shadows twisting around him like living serpents. When he attacked, it was as if all the darkness in the world condensed into a single spear of energy. Ilara reacted instinctively, the locket guiding her movements. She created a shield of light that not only blocked the attack, but reflected it back with triple force. Malachor was hurled against the wall, but quickly rose, his eyes gleaming with insane fury. If I cannot have the power, he roared, no one can. He broke the black ring he wore, and a wave of destructive energy exploded in all directions. Ilara felt his power trying to destroy the very magical foundations of the ancestral chambers. If he succeeded, all the balance the Guardians had maintained for 1,000 years would be shattered forever. It was now or never. Ilara touched the locket one last time, but instead of holding it, she removed it completely from her neck. The silver chain shone like a star in her hands. Mother, she whispered to the painting on the wall, help me do what is right. She raised the locket above her head, and for a moment she saw the ghost of her mother beside her, smiling with pride and love. To protect what we love, Ilara said, sometimes we must sacrifice what we value most. And then she did something that shocked everyone present. Instead of using the locket against Malachor, she crushed it between her hands. The ensuing burst of energy was blinding, but it wasn't destructive. It was purifying. The silver light swept through the chambers, dissolving the shadowy creatures, healing the wounds of battle, and enveloping Malachor in a cocoon of energy that left him completely immobilized. When the light finally faded, Malachor was just an old, defeated man, his dark power completely drained. Impossible, he murmured. You destroyed your own heritage. No, Ilara said, looking at the fragments of the locket in her hands. I freed it. The Guardian's power never depended on an object. It always resided in the heart of those willing to protect others. She turned to the men who had followed Malachor. Without the influence of his dark magic, they seemed confused and lost. Go, she said. Live your lives in peace and try to forget the darkness that brought you here. One by one, they lowered their weapons and left the chambers. Even Marcus and Lord Alden retreated in silence, shame weighing on their expressions. Only Malachor remained, now visibly aged without his artificial magic. What will you do with me? He asked. Ilara studied him for a long moment. I will do what my parents would have done, she said. I will give you a chance at redemption. You will live, but without power, without followers. You will have to find a new way to give meaning to your life. Malachor looked at her with an expression that mixed shock and something that might have been respect. You are wiser than I expected, he murmured, before stumbling out of the chambers. When they were finally alone, Elara turned to Gareth. He had sheathed his sword and watched her with an expression that made her heart accelerate. It's over, she said softly. For them? Yes, Gareth responded, approaching. But for us, perhaps it's just the beginning. Elara smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. The weight of ancestral heritage had disappeared, replaced by something simpler and more powerful, the freedom to choose her own path. And Lady Eleanor? She asked. Your marriage? Gareth smiled, and there was a lightness in his expression she had never seen before. Eleanor agreed to the annulment weeks ago, he said. Apparently she also has someone more suitable in mind. Elara laughed, feeling tears of relief stream down her cheeks. So we're free? She asked. Truly free? As free as our hearts allow, Gareth responded, extending his hand to her. Elara took his hand, feeling the same electric spark as always, but now without the barriers of duty and social expectations. Where do we go now? She asked. Gareth looked around the ancestral chambers, then back at her. This castle is yours by right, he said. We can restore it, make it a home again. Elara nodded, imagining what it would be like to live there with him, building something new on the foundations of the old. Yes, she said. Let's go home. And as they walked together through the corridors that led back to daylight, Elara knew she had found something far more valuable than any magical heritage. She had found her place in the world and the person with whom she wanted to share it. The locket was broken, but the love that had grown between them remained intact, stronger than any ancient magic. 3 months later, the renovations of Castle Ravenwood were almost complete. Elara worked in the garden every morning, planting flowers that filled the air with sweet perfume. Gareth trained the new guards in the courtyard, teaching them not only how to fight, but how to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. It was a simple life without great powers or cosmic responsibilities. It was a life chosen by love, not by destiny. And every night, as they sat together on the restored castle's balcony, watching the sun set over the sea, Elara knew she had made the right decision. Some stories end with grand, heroic gestures. Others end with something even more powerful. Two people choosing to stay together day after day, building happiness from the fragments of a painful past. The power of the Guardians had spread throughout the world, no longer concentrated in a single lineage, but distributed among all those willing to protect and love. It was a more subtle magic, but infinitely stronger. And when Gareth took her hand that night, intertwining their fingers as they watched the stars reflect in the calm sea, Elara knew she had found the greatest treasure of all. Not a crown or a title, but a true home in the heart of someone who loved her exactly as she was.